The arrival of the unknown. The forest stretched endlessly, its towering trees casting long shadows over the narrow dirt road. Elena gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white as she navigated the winding path. The letter from her grandmother's lawyer had come as a shock. She had inherited a sprawling mansion deep in the woods, a place she hadn't even known existed. The lawyer's words echoed in her mind, "Your grandmother left this to you for a reason. It's more than just a house." As the mansion came into view, Elena's breath caught in her throat. It was a Gothic masterpiece, its spires reaching toward the sky like the fingers of a giant. The windows were dark, and the air around the property seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy. She parked her car and stepped out, the crunch of gravel beneath her feet the only sound in the eerie silence. The front door creaked open as if expecting her. The interior was a mix of old-world charm and something else. The walls were lined with strange symbols, and the air smelled faintly of ozone. Elena wandered through the rooms, her fingers brushing against dusty furniture and ancient artifacts. It felt like stepping into another world. In the basement, she found the hidden chamber. The door was concealed behind a bookshelf, and it opened with a soft hiss. Inside, the room was bathed in a soft blue light. At its center stood a pod, its surface smooth and metallic. Elena approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside the pod was a figure, a man, but not quite. His skin shimmered like liquid silver, and his eyes glowed a deep, mesmerizing blue. Before she could react, the pod hissed open, and the figure stepped out. He was tall, his movements graceful and deliberate. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. "Who are you?" Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "I am Kale," he replied, his voice deep and resonant. "And you are the key." Their first meeting was tense, but there was an undeniable connection between them. Kale explained that he was a fugitive, hunted by an empire that sought to enslave humanity. Elena's grandmother had been part of a secret organization that protected Earth from extraterrestrial threats, and the mansion was a sanctuary, a place where the boundaries between worlds were thin. As they talked, Elena felt a strange pull toward Kale. His presence was magnetic, and his touch sent shivers down her spine. There was something about him that felt right. But the mansion held more secrets, and the two of them would need to uncover them together. Secrets of the stars. The days passed in a blur as Elena and Kale explored the mansion. Every room held a new mystery, from ancient alien artifacts to hidden passages that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Kale's knowledge of the cosmos was vast, and he shared stories of distant worlds and civilizations that Elena could barely comprehend. One evening, as they sat in the library, Kale pointed to a constellation carved into the ceiling. "This is not from your sky," he said. "It's a map, a guide to the ley lines that connect this place to other dimensions." Elena's eyes widened. "You mean this house is a gateway?" Kale nodded. "Your grandmother knew the truth. She built this place to protect the ley line, to keep it hidden from those who would misuse its power." As they delved deeper into the mansion's secrets, their bond grew stronger. Kale's touch became more frequent, his presence more comforting. One night, as they stood in the hidden chamber, Elena felt a surge of energy pass between them. The air around them crackled with electricity, and for a moment, their minds seemed to merge. "What was that?" Elena gasped, her heart racing. "Our connection," Kale replied, his voice soft. "It's rare, even among my kind. It means we are compatible." Elena's cheeks flushed, but she didn't pull away. There was something about Kale that made her feel alive in a way she never had before. Their relationship was more than just physical, it was a meeting of minds, a blending of souls. But their peace was short-lived. One night, as they slept, the mansion's alarms blared to life. Kale was on his feet in an instant, his eyes scanning the room for threats. "They found us," he said grimly. The mansion trembled as the first explosion rocked its foundations. Elena stumbled, catching herself on the edge of a table as the chandelier above swayed dangerously. The alarms blared, a piercing sound that echoed through the halls. Cale was already on his feet, his silver skin glowing faintly in the dim light. His eyes, usually a calm, deep blue, now burned with intensity. "They're here," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The Empire has found us." Elena's heart pounded in her chest. "What do we do?" Cale grabbed her hand, his touch sending a jolt of energy through her. "We fight. But we need to get to the armory." The armory was a hidden room deep within the mansion, accessible only through a series of secret passages. As they ran through the halls, the sound of heavy footsteps and alien voices grew louder. The Empire's soldiers were inside. The armory was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. The walls were lined with weapons that looked both ancient and futuristic, energy rifles, plasma blades, and devices she couldn't even begin to understand. Cale moved quickly, handing her a sleek, silver pistol. "This is a pulse gun," he explained. "It's set to stun, but it will buy us time." Elena gripped the weapon, her hands trembling. "I've never used anything like this before." Cale placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch calming. "You'll be fine. Just aim and pull the trigger. Your instincts will guide you." As they left the armory, the first wave of soldiers appeared at the end of the hall. They were clad in black armor, their faces obscured by helmets that glowed with a menacing red light. Elena's breath caught in her throat, but Cale stepped in front of her, his body radiating a protective energy. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice firm. The battle was chaos. Cale moved like a shadow, his movements fluid and precise. He disarmed soldiers with ease, his strength and speed far beyond human capabilities. Elena did her best to keep up, firing the pulse gun at any soldier who got too close. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the sound of energy weapons firing. Despite the danger, Elena couldn't help but notice the way Cale fought, like a dancer, every movement calculated and graceful. There was a beauty in his violence, a rhythm to his strikes that was almost hypnotic. But there was no time to admire him. The soldiers kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. "We can't keep this up," Elena shouted, ducking behind a pillar as a blast of energy narrowly missed her. Cale glanced at her, his eyes glowing brighter. "We don't have to. We just need to hold them off long enough to activate the mansion's defenses." "Defenses? What defenses?" Cale didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed her hand and pulled her down a side passage. They ran through the maze-like halls, the sound of pursuit close behind. Finally, they reached a room Elena hadn't seen before. It was circular, with a domed ceiling covered in intricate carvings. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it rested a glowing crystal. "This is the heart of the mansion," Cale explained, placing his hand on the crystal. "It controls the ley line's energy. If we can activate it, we can create a barrier that will keep the Empire out." Elena watched as the crystal began to pulse with light, the carvings on the ceiling glowing in response. But before the barrier could fully form, the door burst open, and a group of soldiers stormed in. Cale turned to face them, his body tense. "Elena, stay back," he ordered. But Elena wasn't about to let him fight alone. She raised her pulse gun and fired, hitting one of the soldiers in the chest. He staggered back, but the others kept coming. Cale engaged them, his movements a blur of silver and blue. Elena did her best to support him, but she was quickly overwhelmed. One of the soldiers grabbed her, his grip like iron. Elena struggled, but she was no match for his strength. She looked to Cale, but he was surrounded, his focus divided. The soldier raised his weapon, and Elena braced herself for the end. But then, something inside her snapped. A surge of energy coursed through her body, and she felt a connection to the crystal. The room filled with light, and the soldier holding her was thrown back. Elena stood, her body glowing with the same energy as the crystal. Kale stared at her, his eyes wide with surprise. "Elena, what did you do?" I don't know," she replied, her voice trembling. "I just felt it." The soldiers hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do. Kale took advantage of their confusion, disarming the remaining soldiers with swift, precise strikes. The room fell silent, the only sound the hum of the crystal. "We need to go," Kale said, grabbing Elena's hand. "The barrier won't hold forever." As they left the room, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The energy she had felt was still there, lingering just beneath the surface. It was as if the mansion, and Kale, had awakened something inside her. The mansion was quiet again, but the air was thick with tension. The barrier Kale had activated using the crystal held, but it was only a temporary solution. The Empire's forces were relentless, and it was only a matter of time before they found a way to breach the mansion's defenses. Elena and Kale stood in the hidden chamber, the crystal pulsing softly between them. Its light reflected off Kale's silver skin, casting an ethereal glow around the room. "We can't keep running," Elena said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "We need to do something. Something permanent." Kale nodded, his glowing blue eyes fixed on the crystal. "There is a way. But it's dangerous. It requires us to fully activate the ley line, to open a portal to another dimension. But to do that, we'll need to merge our energies completely." Elena frowned. "Merge our energies? What does that mean?" Kale turned to her, his expression serious. "It means we'll have to become one, in a sense. Our minds, our bodies, our souls, they'll be connected in a way that's irreversible. It's a bond that transcends physicality. It's intimate." Elena's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. "And if we do this, we can stop the Empire?" "Yes," Kale said. "The portal will create a shockwave powerful enough to repel their forces. But it will also mean leaving this world behind. We'll have to step through the portal and start anew in another dimension." Elena took a deep breath, her mind racing. The idea of leaving everything she knew behind was terrifying, but the thought of losing Kale, of letting the Empire win, was worse. She looked into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, the fear of rejection. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his. The familiar surge of energy passed between them, stronger than ever. "I trust you," she said softly. "Let's do it." Kale's expression softened, and he brought her hand to his chest. His skin was warm, and she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "This will change everything," he warned. "There's no going back." "I know," Elena replied. "But I'd rather face the unknown with you than stay here and lose everything." The decision made, they began the process. Kale guided Elena to the center of the chamber, where the crystal's light was brightest. They stood facing each other, their hands joined. The air around them crackled with energy, and the symbols carved into the walls began to glow. "Close your eyes," Kale instructed. "Focus on me. On us." Elena did as he said, letting her mind drift. She felt Kale's presence beside her, not just physically but in her mind. It was as if their thoughts were merging, their emotions blending into one. She saw flashes of his memories, his home world, a place of shimmering skies and crystalline cities. She felt his pain, his loneliness, and his hope. And she knew he could see her memories too, her childhood, her struggles, her dreams. The connection deepened, and Elena felt a warmth spreading through her body. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a sense of completeness, of being whole. The energy between them grew stronger, the crystal's light intensifying until it filled the room. "Now," Kale said, his voice echoing in her mind. "We open the portal." Together, they reached out to the crystal, their combined energy flowing into it. The room shook, the air vibrating with power. The symbols on the walls blazed with light, and a swirling vortex began to form in the center of the chamber. It was beautiful and terrifying, a gateway to another world. But as the portal stabilized, the mansion's alarms blared again. The Empire's forces had breached the barrier. The sound of heavy footsteps and energy weapons echoed through the halls, growing louder with each passing second. "They're here," Elena said, her voice trembling. Cale tightened his grip on her hand. "We need to go. Now." They stepped toward the portal, but before they could enter, a group of soldiers burst into the chamber. Their leader, a tall figure in black armor, raised his weapon. "Stop," he commanded. "You're coming with us." Cale stepped in front of Elena, his body radiating a protective energy. "You'll have to go through me first." The soldier fired, but Cale deflected the blast with a wave of his hand. The energy surged back, knocking the soldier off his feet. The other soldiers hesitated, clearly intimidated by Cale's power. "Elena, go," Cale shouted. "I'll hold them off." But Elena shook her head. "No, we do this together." She stepped forward, her body glowing with the same energy as the crystal. The soldiers stared at her in shock, their weapons lowering. Elena raised her hand, and a wave of energy erupted from her, knocking the soldiers back. The force of it sent them sprawling, their weapons clattering to the ground. Cale looked at her, his eyes filled with pride. "You're incredible," he said softly. Elena smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "Let's finish this." Hand in hand, they stepped into the portal. The world around them dissolved into light and color, the mansion and the soldiers fading away. For a moment, they were weightless, suspended in a void of endless possibilities. Then, with a rush of energy, they emerged on the other side. The new world was breathtaking. The sky was a deep, shimmering purple, dotted with twin suns that cast a golden light over the landscape. The ground was covered in crystalline plants that sparkled like diamonds, and in the distance, a city of glass and light rose toward the sky. Elena turned to Cale, her eyes wide with wonder. "Where are we?" "Home," Cale replied, his voice filled with emotion. "Or at least, it will be." They stood together, their hands still joined, and looked out at the new world before them. The bond between them was stronger than ever, a connection that transcended time and space. They had defied the Empire, escaped their world, and found a new beginning. But as they took their first steps into the unknown, Elena knew their journey was far from over. The Empire would not give up so easily, and their bond would be tested in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But for now, they were together, and that was enough. A new dawn. The air in this new dimension was unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. It was crisp and charged, carrying a faint metallic tang that reminded her of the mansion's hidden chamber. The twin suns bathed the landscape in a golden hue, their light refracting through the crystalline plants that covered the ground. The city in the distance shimmered like a mirage, its glass spires reaching toward the sky. It was beautiful, alien, and utterly overwhelming. Cale stood beside her, his silver skin glowing faintly in the sunlight. His hand still held hers, their fingers intertwined. The bond between them pulsed with a quiet, steady energy, a constant reminder of what they had done to get here. Elena could feel his emotions, his relief, his awe, his determination, as clearly as if they were her own. "This is it," Cale said softly, his voice filled with reverence. "This is where we start over." Elena nodded, though her heart was still racing. The journey through the portal had been disorienting, a whirlwind of light and sound that left her breathless. But now, standing on solid ground in this strange new world, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in weeks. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cale turned to her, his glowing blue eyes meeting hers. "Now, we build a life. Together." The words sent a shiver down Elena's spine. Together. It was a promise, a commitment, and a challenge all at once. She squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. "I'm with you," she said. "No matter what." They began to explore their new surroundings, moving cautiously through the crystalline forest. The plants were unlike anything Elena had ever seen, translucent stalks that swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves refracting light into rainbows. The ground beneath their feet was soft, covered in a fine, glittering dust that sparkled with every step. It felt like walking through a dream. As they approached the city, Elena noticed something strange. The buildings were made of a material that seemed to shift and change, their surfaces rippling like water. The spires twisted and turned, defying gravity in ways that made her head spin. It was as if the city itself was alive, breathing and shifting with a rhythm of its own. "This place, it's incredible," Elena said, her voice filled with awe. Kale nodded. "It's a nexus city, a place where multiple dimensions converge. The people here are travelers, like us. They come from all corners of the multiverse." Elena's eyes widened. "So we're not alone?" "No," Kale replied. "But we'll need to be careful. Not everyone here is friendly." They entered the city cautiously, their senses on high alert. The streets were bustling with activity, filled with beings of all shapes and sizes. Some looked almost human, while others were completely alien, creatures with multiple limbs, glowing eyes, and skin that shimmered like liquid metal. The air was filled with the hum of conversation, though the languages were unfamiliar. Kale led Elena through the streets, his hand never leaving hers. They attracted curious glances, but no one approached them. Elena could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken questions in their eyes. She tightened her grip on Kale's hand, drawing strength from his presence. "Where are we going?" she asked as they turned down a narrow alley. "To find someone who can help us," Kale replied. "An old friend." The alley opened into a small courtyard, where a figure sat on a low stone bench. They were cloaked in shadows, their features obscured, but as Kale and Elena approached, the figure looked up. Their eyes glowed a deep, fiery orange, and their skin was a patchwork of colors that shifted and changed like a kaleidoscope. "Kale," the figure said, their voice a low, melodic hum. "It's been a long time." "Too long," Kale replied, his tone cautious. "We need your help, Zyn." Zyn tilted their head, their glowing eyes flicking to Elena. "And who is this?" "This is Elena," Kale said, his voice softening. "She's important." Zyn studied Elena for a moment, their gaze piercing. Then they nodded, as if satisfied. "Very well. What do you need?" "Sanctuary," Kale said. "And information. The Empire is still after us." Zyn's expression darkened. "The Empire is always after someone. But you're safe here, for now. Come, let's talk." They followed Zyn into a small, dimly lit room filled with strange artifacts, crystals that pulsed with light, scrolls covered in unfamiliar symbols, and devices that hummed with energy. Zyn gestured for them to sit, then leaned forward, their eyes narrowing. "The Empire's reach is growing," they said. "They've been hunting travelers, closing nexus points. If they find this city." "They won't," Kale said firmly. "Not if we stop them." Zyn raised an eyebrow. "We?" Kale glanced at Elena, then back at Zyn. "Elena and I are bonded. Our connection gives us power, power that can challenge the Empire." Zyn's eyes flicked to Elena again, this time with a hint of respect. "A human bonded to an Etherian. That's rare. Dangerous, but rare." Elena frowned. "Dangerous?" "The bond amplifies your abilities," Zyn explained. "But it also makes you a target. The Empire will stop at nothing to capture you." "Then we'll fight," Elena said, her voice steady. "We're not running anymore." Zyn smiled, a slow, approving curve of their lips. "I like you, human. You've got spirit. Over the next few days, Zyn helped them settle into the city. They found a small apartment in one of the shifting spires, its walls made of a material that changed color depending on the light. It was strange, but it felt like home. Elena and Kale spent their days exploring the city, learning its secrets, and preparing for the battles to come. But even in this new world, the bond between them continued to grow. It was more than just a connection, it was a merging of their souls. Elena could feel Kale's thoughts, his emotions, his memories. And he could feel hers. It was intimate, overwhelming, and beautiful. One night, as they stood on the balcony of their apartment, watching the twin suns set over the city, Elena turned to Kale. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Leaving your world? Bonding with me?" Kale looked at her, his glowing eyes filled with warmth. "Never," he said. "You are my home now, Elena. Wherever we are, as long as we're together, I'm where I'm meant to be." Elena smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. She reached up, her fingers brushing against his cheek. "I love you," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Kale's eyes softened, and he leaned down, his lips brushing against hers. The kiss was electric, sending waves of energy through both of them. When they pulled apart, Elena felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "I love you too," Kale whispered. "Always." As the suns dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a soft, golden light, Elena and Kale stood together, their bond stronger than ever. They had defied the Empire, escaped their world, and found a new beginning. But their journey was far from over. The Empire would come for them, and they would be ready. For now, though, they had each other. And that was enough. The end.